Hi, today I want to look at footwork and how to train your footwork against an unpredictable opponent, but without the unpredictable opponent. So a mistake a lot of people make when training their footwork is they tend to be very static. And that's not necessarily a fault in the training, in that we tend to start with this position where you're head on and a punch comes towards you, and then you apply the footwork, whether it's a turn and a technique, or it's stepping around, but you're always dealing with something coming straight on. So here's my centre line, here comes the strike, I move out of the way and I use whatever technique I'm training at the time, which is how you want to start and how you want to train. You want to make sure you're always training against this basic centre line punch. But then when you start to look at application, obviously your partner needs to be moving around, coming in at different angles, unpredictable angles, because people aren't static. This is a dummy, so it's static, so I have to use my imagination to work with this static punch and make it more alive, even though it's completely static. So for example, starting at a different angle, so if I'm here straight on and I apply my bonks out, that's fine, we train that all the time. But if my body's slightly angled, not necessarily on purpose, okay, it could just be that I'm here, my opponent is coming in this way, and you can turn and face him, but that changes everything, because my feet are now in a slightly different position. It's not in this straight form here. So we can look at the angle of the body relative to this straight line here. So here we've got 90 degrees, but what if I'm slightly off to the side? What if I'm turned? Hand position, all these different little things are all variables that can change according to where this line is. When you're dealing with someone moving around, these are all the things that are going to change. This is the thing that's different to having something straight on. The thing that is different when you're dealing with a live opponent is all the angles and the positions are going to change, along with unpredictability and how you're feeling that day. Have you warmed up? Are you tired? All of these things, all of these many factors. One factor is going to be the angle is not going to be this preferred angle. Now when we train application, what we like to do is stand straight in front of the person with our hands down and with not really any stance, because this is a horrible way to start. And if you can start from here and get your hands up and defend, then if your hands are up, it's a lot easier. But what we're not changing is the angle. Now sometimes we do multiple opponent attacks at the club, where we have 2 or 3 people coming in to attack, which isn't necessarily about dealing with multiple opponents. It can be, but it's also about different angles. So if you have someone in front of you, you come in here and you deal with them, and then another person's coming in here, well, your angle's completely different. Everything changes, and so you learn to adapt to these different angles. So what we need to do is we need to learn about and practice at different angles. And the other thing is, what you're going to discover is certain techniques break down at a certain point. So one thing that was really influenced me early on in my training, after only training for say a couple of years, was Sifu advised me to start working on my tanda, but start looking at the point at which it broke down. So we were dealing with a straight punch coming in, and we were dissolving that attack with tongue punch. Mostly at this point, for this particular training exercise, we were on the outside gate. So if this is the arm coming in, I'm on the outside of the arm, the outside of the opponent's arm. And then what we did was my partner started throwing punches with the elbow progressively coming out, because you're never going to get a dead straight punch. We train against it at the start, but most people don't punch in this dead straight way. The elbow tends to come out slightly. And so what the partner did was, gradually over time, they throw their punches with more and more of a curve in them. And what I started to learn was, at some point it didn't work. So at some point I couldn't get round to the outside, even with footwork. Although I was trying to stick to a turn, even with footwork I couldn't get to the outside of the arm. So at some point I was forced to go to the inside, and I learned where that technique broke down. So at some point it will break down. Now, my definition of where you can't come the outside of the arm is when the punch comes from the outside of the shoulder. So if the punch is coming round here, I can't, there's no way for me to get to the outside of that arm. I'm forced to go, this is the inside here, I'm forced to go inside the arm because it's too far. But at other points before that, it's going to get progressively more and more difficult to apply my usual turning Tansao. And what you'll feel is as the elbow comes out, as they become more rounded, you'll get more and more pressure on the Tansao. Now that doesn't mean it doesn't work, but it just means that your Tansao needs to be properly structured and executed. Otherwise it will collapse. And then at some point it just won't work because the punch is coming too curved. It might start to come past the shoulder. Remember, some people will punch and the elbow will be out, but the fist will still be coming inside this line here, but the elbow will be out. So at that point, you start to receive a lot of pressure on the Tansao. You might at that point decide to pass it. So passing here. So I might receive it with the Tansao, but rather than going forward with the strike here, I might pass it onto this hand and strike with this hand. That's another topic. What I want to look at is where techniques break down, and specifically footwork. As a side note, Master Wing Chun also talked about where techniques break down when he came and gave a seminar at our class quite a long time ago. He talked about where techniques go wrong, and he played Chisao with a very skilled instructor, and he played it at just the point where all the techniques broke down. So his Tansao was not here, it was here, it looked terrible. And he was playing Chisao saying, this looks terrible, this is awful, but he made it work because he knew that precise point where techniques break down. He knew that his Tansao might work here, but here it will collapse. Because he'd gone through this process and he had that many years of experience of knowing his techniques and his own body and his structures. So let's take a little look at footwork and how you can train, we can take this concept of where techniques break down, where they work and where they don't work, and how we can feed that into working training to deal with an unpredictable opponent when we have no opponent. Okay, so if you take this as the neutral stance, I'm standing directly in front of my opponent, and a turn when receiving a straight line punch would look like this, or like this, and if I stepped away from the opponent, I'm stepping this way, or this way. Now let's look at foot placement. So at the moment my feet are parallel, like I say, they're at a 90-degree angle to a strike coming in. Now what happens if I move one foot slightly further forwards? And I can start to work and drill my techniques like this, and I can feed in angles. Now at this point you might want to have some sort of centerline indicator, whether it's a dummy arm or a mark on the wall or anything, just so you can see that. Now let's move this foot back again. Now what we're going to do is, from here you're going to start to move your foot further forward in increments. So you work with it here, and you could work with it forwards here. Remember to turn both sides, and then here. And each time you can actually play with weight distribution. So if we take it back here, I'm 50-50. Now if I move it forwards a little bit, I could still keep it 50-50 and work on my turning, or I could start to move it a little bit towards the rear leg, or even to the front leg. So like I say, you don't necessarily know where you're going to be. The idea is to be able to work from any position and apply your techniques. Now as you move it further forwards, you might find it very difficult to deal with that front line punch coming in. And then what you could do is you could maybe move this foot further back as well. Start to do that. Let's go back to neutral, and then you can work with the other foot as well, moving it forwards in different increments, finding out how this changes what you're doing. Now I've moved it forwards and backwards. What we're now going to do is we're going to slightly narrow the stance and move one foot backwards. So the kind of polar opposite of this approach is the bladed stance here, where I've got one foot directly in front of the other. As in your Bumar stance, some martial arts do favour this sort of stance, and there are pros and cons to both. But we're going to gradually work our way there. So we're going to take one leg back, and then you can work with different weight distributions. You could take one leg back and assume this is a form of Bumar, put all your weight on on this leg, on the rear leg, or you could start with 50-50, start working with your turns here. Move it back, work with the turns. Once again, you're going to leave that centre line indicator, and you're going to keep working it back until you get to here. Now once you get to the bladed stance, this isn't going to work, because when you turn, you're not moving off the centre line. You might be extending your front hand, but you're not actually moving yourself off the centre line out of the way of the strike, and you're actually exposing yourself. You're actually exposing yourself far worse than you were before, so you're moving yourself to a worse position when you go here. But there's a whole world between this and this to explore in terms of turning. You can also look at stepping as well once you've explored turning. So once you've turned from here, you could look at stepping. Now, what if I have to recover here? So if I'm here in this bladed stance and I can't turn, can I step? Absolutely, I can step, and that will correct my stance. Now, if I step with the rear leg, that's not necessarily going to work as well as this front leg here. If I step with the rear leg, once again, I'm not moving myself off the centre line if my weight is on the front leg. However, if I move my rear leg and place my weight on it, I am off the centre line. So you're always working with the centre line. Why? Because that's where the punch is coming in. Even if it's curved, there's still a centre line there. There tends to be two working in terms of power, but there are always centre lines working. So just to explain a little bit more about what I mean about the centre line, with so we can see a centre line reference here. So if I have a bladed stance here, even if I square off my shoulders, this is the strike, and I turn, this strike is still coming towards my head. My strike is here, and I've opened up this whole side of my body, which is no good. So what it does is, if I'm here with a bladed stance, it forces me to step here. So if I move my front leg out, I can then move myself off centre line and still strike. Okay. If I swing the back leg out, it's not necessarily it's not preferable for me. It might work for you, in that you're still coming off the centre line. It's coming here, but for me it doesn't work as well, because the opponent, particularly if they're front leg forwards and you only move the back leg out, you might find them driving into the front leg. They could come up and under, which would cause an upset to your centre of gravity, and it could even put you on the floor. So I prefer to take the front leg out and move out this way. It also sets me up for great counters with these strikes and that sort of thing, by moving the front leg out. So you could also, once you've worked with different angles, just with the initial strike, you can then work on follow-ups. So for example, if I move my front leg forwards here and I've come around here, what are my obvious follow-ups? So if I want to do an elbow strike, it can change which leg goes forward with the elbow strike. So with my front leg forwards, and I do an elbow strike, I would probably fire it off the rear leg, so my rear leg is back and the leg I've turned on is still forwards. If I do it from my normal turning position, I tend to bring my front leg forwards and fire off my elbow strike. Once I'm here, it doesn't necessarily have to be an elbow strike that comes forwards. It could be any hand that comes forwards here, or I could even come around here. But it all changes, so you can just explore and see what's open. So the best thing to do to work with follow-ups is, once you've done your initial technique, is to feel what comes natural, what's economical in motion, but what feels natural to do. So from here, it always feels natural to come forwards here with the rear hand. And depending on how close they are, you do an elbow strike. So once again, you need to be visualizing correctly what's happening. If I'm doing the technique and I'm here, that's their head. It feels like an elbow strike. It's very natural. But if their head is here, I can still come forwards with the rear hand. Now what you do is personal preference. If I come forwards with this rear hand, it's advantageous in that I can do head control. I've got a lot of control over where that rear hand is coming in. It opens up certain techniques, opens up different techniques with the legs. Once I've come in for this elbow strike here, it changes things. For me, a natural thing is to come around the back of the neck, control the rear hand and go for a knee strike. But you've just got to feel out what's best. It could be that I get to the elbow strike here, they've moved back slightly, in which case I haven't got as much room to come behind the neck. So in which case I do the elbow strike and then probably follow through with a Faxau. Remember, Faxau's angle can change, so if you do, depending on your elbow strike, if it's come down here at this 45 degrees, they might be going down from the elbow strike, in which case you'd follow them down. Why? Because their level has changed, and you need to be cognizant of that level and follow the centre line. Always follow the centre line and the spine to control the other person. So you can just work with it, work with the different angles. You can spend a lot of time just working with one foot slightly forwards, and then there's angle of the body as well. So it could be you've got 1 foot forwards and I'm angled this way, or you've got 1 foot forwards and I'm angled this way. There's no way to really tell what position your body is going to be in a fight, because we're dealing with unpredictability. So the more possibilities you explore, the more comfortable you're going to be in all possibilities. That's what you want to find out. You want to find out all possibilities. You want to find out where stuff breaks down and doesn't work. And then you can learn to, you've got two choices when that happens. Either you train it so that you don't get in that position, or if you feel yourself in that position, you change it very quickly. Or two, you work from that position, learn how to recover. So I'd say the first one is Chum Q, and the second one is Bu-G, which is about recovery positions. And you can train those in whatever way you see fit. And that's why you might see some people playing Chi-Sao a little differently, because they might be allowing themselves to get into poor positions because they want to practice recovering. Not that they want to be in those poor positions, but they need to practice how to get out of them. Otherwise they'll never be able to make it work. So that's what you can do, just find and explore the techniques. So this is, it's beyond just training for perfection, which is what we're all trying to do, but then train the imperfection as well and learn to work from there. So what you want to do is you want to train the two things. You want to train perfection and imperfection. So you want to train at home for perfection. You want to train all of your techniques, trying to get them as perfect as possible, because when reality hits, you'll only be fighting at maybe 50% of your actual skill level, because it looks messy, everything's unpredictable, there's so many factors. So the more you train perfection, the more you're going to get of that when it actually kicks off. But you also want to look at and explore imperfection, because when it is imperfect, you need to be comfortable in that situation. You need to be comfortable working at the edges of where techniques work. And it's a continuum, so you might have perfection here and complete imperfection here, and you train along that continuum, and you look at everything from one side to another and be comfortable moving along it. So find where the imperfection is, and find where all your techniques completely break down, and then when it's happening, you're comfortable in that environment, you're comfortable dealing with that unpredictability in imperfection, but you're also training the perfection side of it alongside of it.